Hi, I'm Amanda Jane Woodall and welcome to my fashion school. So today we discuss a luxury celebrity fashion designer where we take a look in this series at who created punk, London street fashion and the greatest British style icons. Asking why was punk important in the life of Vivienne Westwood. Vivienne Isabel Swire was born on the 8th of April 1941 to her cobbler father Gordon and her mother Dora, who worked at a cotton mill. She was born during the Second World War in the rural countryside of Derbyshire, and she saw the women of the time, because of rationing, spending a lot of time knitting, crafting and sewing their own clothing. And Vivienne would dream about a magical house in a forest where she wore a beautiful dress that attracted all the boys. And in retrospect, maybe that was a bit of foreshadowing. After a move to Harrow when she was 17, she enrolled on a silversmith course. But the family income was quite limited. They were running a post office and Vivienne really worried about the family's finances. So she quit her course and at 18 she worked as a secretary in a factory whilst simultaneously earning her qualification to be a school teacher. She got married and had a baby called Ben with a respectable man called Derek Westwood, and he ran the local dance halls. And it seemed like Vivienne's steady life was mapped out for her. However, her creative spirit was repressed and she felt very restricted by the life of a housewife and mother. And she admits that her role as a mother was complicated because she was always focused on her political crusading. And her brother was attending the art school and mixing with all the free-thinking creatives, and Vivienne just pined for a way into this lifestyle. And her opportunity to make the jump came when her brother introduced her to storyteller and artist Malcolm McLaren, who shared Vivienne's love for rock and roll. And Vivienne had been making her own clothes since about 16 because of the make, do and mend generation, and she started making really striking clothing, teddy boy suits for Malcolm McLaren. And McLaren's signature look was really helpful in giving him the edge in the music industry, and he was already managing some alternative music rock bands. But Vivienne never planned to be a fashion designer. She was an intellectual. She was interested in learning about the world, and she saw the birth of capitalism, and she really hated the older generation who she saw as fascists. And McLaren also worked at a fashion house called Paradise Garage. It was a shop in Kings Road and had an anarchic customer base. And Vivienne and Malcolm moved into the back room of the shop, eventually taking over the business in 1971, and they called the shop Let It Rock. And the original store sold teddy boy clothing, but Vivienne and Malcolm both had very eclectic and chaotic tastes in fashion and music. And every time some new inspiration would come to them, they would rename, restock and refit their shop. And so the shop was refurbed and renamed many times. In 1972, it was Too Fast to Live, Too Young to Die. In 1974, they called it X. And in 1976, it was renamed Seditionaries. From rock and roll to greaser to naughty stuff, they decided to encourage their young fan base to be very eclectic and experimental in their fashion sense and just leave behind the clean-cut image of the early 1970s. And the shop was so popular that they had to have police escorts on the hour to kind of make sure the queues were manageable. And this culmination of challenging the authorities, dressing expressively along with Malcolm's band, the X Pistols, was the start of punk rock. A swearing, spitting and slurring music genre accompanied with slashed shirts, wild offensive slogans and messy self-cut hair. And Vivienne was finding that her clothes were a key component of punk, even though at that time she was a little bit overshadowed by Malcolm McLaren and his X Pistols. But this would all change in the 1980s when Vivienne and Malcolm split and she went to live in a Battersea council house as a single parent, but they still carried on a working relationship. Malcolm's time in music had gone horribly wrong, so now he wanted to concentrate on the fashion industry. And McLaren suggested that they should show the stock from the new shop, which was now called World's End, at London Fashion Week. And this would be the start of Vivienne Westwood as a designer in her own right, as in 1984 she dropped McLaren completely. The new shop indulged Vivienne's interest in corsetry and pattern making from the 17th and 18th centuries, as well as her interest in Asia and the Far East. She had seen punk as taking on the British establishment, but now she wanted to plunder the entire world. And she entered into another counterculture in the New Romantics, and the style had billowing sleeves and very theatrical costumes that were completely different from the corporate image of the 80s twin set with shoulder pads, and this new kind of pirate style ridiculed that success and hunger for capitalism that was a big part of the 80s. Her recognition through the 80s grew and grew as people started to see how challenging her work was as she invested in topics like Native America, homelessness, and paganism. And she inspired many future creatives like Boy George, Alexander McQueen, and John Galliano. And her collection, Witches, was particularly iconic as it featured Keith Haring, a genius of an artist, and was worn in an editorial by Madonna. So in just one collection, she worked with two of the greatest icons of the 80s. And she would reinvent herself again in 1987 when she started to look into her longtime adversary, the royal family. And this all started when she was on a train and she saw a very elegant little girl who had a tweed jacket, hair in a bun, and carried some ballet shoes. And she just thought she looked so calm amongst the chaos. And so a textile salesperson introduced Vivienne to Harris tweed, and this was an important historical textile that had been very popular in Britain in the 1900s. And this is because it can only be sourced and made in the Outer Hebrides, which gives it the exclusivity that rich and successful people are looking for. And Vivienne showcased her new collection featuring Harris tweed in aristocratic wear. And although now indulging in elite society, Vivienne showed politically she was not for turning when she featured on the front page of Tatler magazine dressed up as Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, and she really disagreed with Margaret Thatcher's policies, and she was actually wearing a suit that had been intended for Margaret Thatcher, so it was like she was disrespecting her whilst wearing her own clothes. And this didn't go down very well with the Thatcherites, who promptly made sure the editor of Tatler was fired. And her start to the 1990s went off with a bang when she won the British Fashion Council's Designer of the Year. And she released a collection called Portrait, which was inspired by her love of classical painting. And a really nice detail was that the models were wearing wooden shoes meant to look like plinths that the art was housed on. And she received an honour from the Queen in 1992 when she was named OBE. And this is very ironic, as she is the same person that was arrested in the 70s for indecent exhibition. And another milestone of 1992 was her marriage to Austrian designer Andreas Kronthaler, and she had met Andreas while working as a teacher at the Vienna School of Fine Arts, and she recruited him as she thought he was a fantastic sculptural designer. And she spoke about how she loved to have a sparring partner to work with in fashion, as she had done with in the past with Malcolm McLaren. And Kronthaler is a very expressive, highly artistic and skilled sculptural designer in his own right. And he helped Vivienne to evolve the business throughout the 1990s, where they released fragrances, cosmetics, and a menswear line. And the 90s saw the rise of the supermodel, and Vivienne Westwood was at the forefront of this media spectacle. In 1993 came the very famous fall of Naomi Campbell on the Vivienne Westwood runway, and this was due to her wearing a combination of rubber tights and towering skyscraper high heels. And in 1994, Kate Moss stunned the audience when she appeared in the Vivienne Westwood show as a topless Marie Antoinette eating an ice cream. And there lies in Vivienne Westwood's talent for always aligning herself with the most exciting and intriguing celebrities of the moment. And in the 2000s, the brand changed its focus again, and now it was to highlight the issues concerning climate change and human rights violations. And the fashion industry is very notorious for being secretive when it comes to discussing their political leanings, and none have been as publicly outspoken and viewed protesting as much as Vivienne Westwood. And Vivienne's modern work has been made by sculpting her designs onto a half-scale mannequin and then gaining inspiration from what she sees within this sculpture, as well as reinventing her old techniques of collaging, stitching together DIY and print work. And in 2006, rightly so, she received her damehood from the Queen. And the rumour is that she flashed the press with no knickers on, and the Queen actually found this very amusing. She created the Active Resistance to Propaganda manifesto and began introducing this to young people. And she also had a web series where she talked about the three evils of capitalism, which are nationalistic ideologies, organised lying, and non-stop distraction. And she also started to train a new generation of activists to carry on her legacy in disrupting the industry and promoting climate change issues. And It's true to say that Vivienne Westwood could be viewed as hypocritical because she's now trying to destroy an industry that she has profited off. But Vivienne made herself very clear: do not buy new. If you're going to buy new, make good choices, and it better be Vivienne Westwood. And so sadly, we lost Vivienne Westwood on the 29th of December 2022. And this is just an unbearable loss for fashion, as she is completely irreplaceable. And it's so important as fashion designers that we respect Vivienne's legacy by using our fashion as a tool to promote what we really believe in, and looking and challenging an industry that causes so much damage to working class people. So we've come to the end of this video, but I will see you again in my upcoming video when we're going to do a cheap, affordable DIY right in time for the Valentine's season. Feel the love for Valentine's Day.